Serious, what was the dirtiest trick ever pulled in the history of war? During the Second World War, German forces would rig crooked wall paintings to explode when straightened with hopes that it would kill Allied officers when they came in to set up command posts. The logic being that Private Joe Blow clearing the building, looking for enemies isn't going to care or even notice if the painting is askew. But General Robert Important guy who sets up his new command post in the building and is in his office for hours probably would. The Germans also strung piano wire across roads to take out anyone riding by in a jeep. Yup, my gramps told me a story about this. After he was wounded for his third time, they made him a career. He was on a motorcycle, and because of these piano wires he would always ride hunched over. He lost a small piece of scalp instead of his head when he drove underneath one of these wires. In WW1 the Allies became used to the smell of chemical weapons and would put their gas masks on quickly. The Germans changed their tactics and would use nearly odorless vomit-inducing chemicals that would absorb quickly into the lungs first. Then, once soldiers were vomiting and couldn't keep their gas masks on, they would fire the main artillery barrage containing the lethal chemicals. I feel like the Great War was the worst war of them all. Conventional weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, bloody muddy trenches, getting clubbed in the face, as if it were medieval times. Yeah, not good. All wars following have been more about ideologies and principles. Not saying wars since have been any better or worse, but at least WW2 had a reason to fight Germany. The disregard for your own troops is also pretty unreal. Commanders expected heavy losses and planned for human barrages to lead to mass loss of life. Mix in the sheer lack of modern medicine and it's a shit show. Barbaric tactics with near medieval medicine. That kind of thing started with the Napoleonic Wars a century beforehand. WW1 just took it to a new scale. In the trenches of France of World War I, General Monash was given with the unenviable task of punching through the German line to claim the French town of Le Hamel. The way that Monash went about doing this was both revolutionary and bloody sneaky. The German forces were well equipped and well fortified, reinforced with heavy artillery and machine guns, and the troops were very well trained. Faced by these odds, Monash began to condition the German forces. Every day at dawn, he would let loose a barrage of smoke bombs followed by mustard gas canisters. The Germans, following their training, would equip themselves with gas masks which protected them. Monash kept up this bombardment for 2 weeks, and soon the Germans became accustomed to the pattern of attack, and would immediately don their gas masks and hunker down at the first sign of smoke. But on the dawn of the 4th of July, the smoke bombs were not followed by gas, but by the Australians. The German gas masks protected them from mustard gas and smoke, but they also vastly impeded their vision, hearing, and ability to communicate with the noise of the battle and the obscuring smoke. They were deaf and blind on the battlefield, and to make things worse, this was not an unprotected infantry massed attack, but a creeping barrage supported by a division of tanks, heavy artillery, and aircraft. The tanks protected the vulnerable infantry, and the artillery and aircraft prevented the Germans from effectively deploying anti-tank measures. The battle was over in just 90 minutes, and marked the rise of mixed arms warfare. That made me think of Scipio Africanus's strategy at the Battle of Ilipa. The Romans and Carthaginians spent the first few days preceding the battle observing and testing each other. Scipio would always wait for the Carthaginians to deploy and advance from their camp before leading out his own troops. The Roman formation always presented the legions in the center and the weaker Iberian allies on the wings, leading the Carthaginian commanders, Hasdrubal and Mago, to believe that this would be the Roman arrangement on the day of battle. Believing his deception had taken a firm hold on the Carthaginian commanders, Scipio made his move. First he ordered the army to be fed and armed before daylight. He then promptly sent his cavalry and light missile troops against the Carthaginian outposts at daybreak, while advancing with his main force behind, all the way to the front of the Carthaginian position. That day he posted his legions on the wings and the Iberians in the center. Surprised by the Romans' sudden attack, the Carthaginians rushed to arm themselves and sallied forth without breakfast. Still believing that Scipio would arrange his force in the earlier fashion, Hasdrubal deployed his elite Africans in the center and the Iberian mercenaries on his wings. He was not able to change formation after discovering the new Roman arrangement because the opposing army was too close, as Scipio had ordered his troops to form for battle closer to the Carthaginian camp. Before the Battle of Yorktown, US Civil War, Confederate General Magruder was able to convince McClellan that he had 40,000 troops manning his defenses rather than his actual force of 10,000. He found a point in the defenses where he knew his troops would be observed and counted, and marched them past that point several times. McClellan had 120,000 troops and superior artillery, but like always, hesitated to attack even with superior numbers. He also thought that another general was approaching with 60,000 men, close to the actual number, and didn't want to attack Magruder's 40,000 and be hit by the 60,000 as well, so he waited for his own reinforcement and more reconnaissance. If he had attacked Magruder, he would have overwhelmed him and been able to prepare for Johnston's arrival. Instead, he waited to attack until Magruder's forces were reinforced. Johnston arrived and added even more troops, and the Confederates were eventually able to slip away from the battle with only 300 casualties. Dr. Magruder marched troops in a circle past his enemies, making 10,000 men look like 40,000, causing the cautious McClellan to hesitate and waste the opportunity. There's a prevailing sentiment that, if McClellan wasn't so cautious, the Civil War could have been won in 1861. His waiting and retreating, and not pursuing retreats, to prevent casualties have the South time to mobilize and present a strong military threat, instead of cutting through them like the hot knife they were through the South's proverbial butter. His refusal to attack and sustain high casualties in his own army over a shorter period of time led to the rise of Grant. Hoss's entire plan was to sustain high casualties until the South collapsed economically. Dirtiest trick that was conceived, but not used, was British scientists formulating a plan of dropping anthrax-laced linseed cakes into cattle fields as a bionuke of sorts once it worked up the food chain. After initial experiments destroyed pretty much all life on the island they used, they decided that possibly killing off everything in continental Europe probably wasn't a good idea. According to the wiki, the government didn't plan on even cleaning the test island up until a group of scientists dropped off contaminated soil at a military research facility and threatened to make further drops in order to ensure the rapid loss of indifference of the government and the equally rapid education of the general public. Terrorism wins again. But the threat was issued in 1981, and cleanup didn't start until 1986. I clean up chemical/biological spills and soil for a living, and while this is a bit long, it's not that unusual for a multi-million job like that would have been. Let's say it took a year for someone to actually officially decide that yes, this is a problem. It then takes at least a year to get funding, 9 months to properly write up the job for public tendering, another half year to let the companies fill in the tender, 3 months to pick someone, half a year to do all the planning, another half year for permits. These overlap a bit, so call it 9 months. Then the fun process of actually getting your gear, mobilizing your infrastructure, because abandoned island, that's hard working. And then it's 1986, and we can move the first shovelful of dirt. Apparently the decontamination process consisted of spraying diluted formaldehyde everywhere, and the traditional removal of the most heavily contaminated topsoil. When formaldehyde improves the habitability of the area, you know you really fucked it up good. The Russians and their use of a scorched earth policy. I can't think of a better way to flip off your invaders than ruining all your own shit, so when they do take it, it's worthless. Not only that, but the land itself is just too damn cold. So go ahead, take the land. You will just freeze to death. Congratulations. Red 3 Bigs 6.1k points. 3 years ago Russia also gets to enjoy a strategy almost no one else gets to enjoy, retreating because there's so much land vs their neighbors. The enemy must advance and stretch out their supply lines, while Russia shortens their supply lines. The hard part for the Russians was always having any supplies to send out. I'm watching the Great War YouTube channel on WWI, and there was a really interesting comment about Romania joining the war on the side of the Entente. It sounds like a good thing, but Russia actually saw Romania as a liability. Romania had men, But their supplies were shit, they weren't trained well, had archaic weaponry and almost no heavy artillery, etc. So now Russia has to take care of this new ally and not let them get their ass kicked lest the Entente lose morale. Problem is Russia never had a shortage of men, they had a shortage of modern equipment and supplies. The generals rarely asked for more men, but they constantly asked for heavy guns and ammunition. So basically, Romania brought nothing to the table for Russia besides distraction of Central Powers forces and a wider front for strategic engagement. I found it interesting how a country like Russia could gain an ally, but it's not even a net positive. And once the Germans took over Romania they looted it of everything they could. Food was a big part of it, since at the time the British blockade was starting to cut into the caloric intake of Germany's civilian population. Not so dirty, but Turks had the Turan tactic. The army would form it into a crescent, with the arms of the crescent being the armored, strong divisions and middle front being the fastest divisions and middle back being the highest firepower, cannons. They'd start the battle lined up and charge, then the fast middle front guys would start retreating to the lines behind the middle back, the cannons. The arms of the crescent would hold firm, because they were the armored part. The enemy would think they were retreating completely, because it looks like they are losing their shit, and also their formation, and would chase after them, only to be met with the cannons and to be encircled by the crescent's arms. It was a slaughter of the enemy after that. Insert _gnome _ here 1.7k. 3 years ago Hannibal did a similar thing, before he was defeated by the same tactic. Indeed. Canny. Still taught in military academies, apparently. A double envelopment, still one of the best displays of organizational and tactical mastery that can be achieved today. Is that like a pincer movement? Correct, they are synonyms. Trying to figure out if that was a goatee reference or not. Blank stare. Washington crossing the Delaware, sneaked into the Hessian camp while they were drunk and celebrating Christmas. 3 American losses versus 22 losses on the Hessian side, and 1,000 prisoners, capture of their weapons, gunpowder, and supplies. Edit. Deleted repeated text manalf _antooth 1.5k. 3 years ago desperate times, man, since it probably saved the revolution. This was a huge moral boost at a time where the fledgling American military was desperate for any victory. Although the American escape from Long Island a few months later is a true miracle that, indeed, truly saved the revolution. Indeed. There were a couple of points throughout the war for independence that, if they went the other way, would have likely broken the back of the American forces. Tactics, bravery, leadership, great luck and the French, in reverse order of importance. And Hercules Mulligan. Attila spying on the British government. So there's this kind of honey made in Turkey called mad honey. It's made from the pollen of rhododendron flowers. If you eat very much of it, you get very intoxicated, and you often hallucinate. You can even nod on it. A few times in antiquity, it was used as a weapon of war. For example, the Persians left some out for the Romans to find. The Romans are that sweet shit right up, and then the Persians attacked them, while they were all tripping balls and defenseless. Where can I get this honey? Here go. modernpharma.com/2014/09/ strange history hallucinogenic mad honey. We know that if you eat more than 1 spoonful of honey including grey and not arxin, you are at risk of mad honey poisoning, Turidi says. In spring and summer, the honeys are fresh and may include more grey and not arxin than in other seasons. If that doesn't dissuade the adventurous foodie, then Turidi says to limit intake to less than a teaspoon, and if you feel some symptoms associated with mad honey, you should get medical care as soon as possible. What a world we live in. It's Tuesday morning in America, and I'm trying to figure out how to buy toxic Turkish honey. Just in case you missed it in the wiki. It was recognized that honey resulting from these plants has a slightly hallucinogenic and laxative effect. So there's that.